Social justice warriors. What the hell is going on with these people? A lot of people have expressed mystification or disbelief at how stupid and short-sighted and counterproductive these people are. I mean, social justice warriors are really preoccupied with critiquing, the systems of power and the unequal power relationships within Western civilization, which basically means critiquing Western civilization. And they want to overturn all of these, which basically means overturning and destroying Western civilization. Now, why would they want to do this? Western civilization is the only civilization that has ever existed which would tolerate these kind of people to the extent that they've been tolerated. And, for one thing, it's the only civilization that's been prosperous enough to afford tolerating these kind of nuisances and these kind of pests, to the extent that we have tolerated them as a form of conspicuous consumption, right? We kind of tolerate these people as a form of abundance signaling, like, oh, well, we don't care. We have so much power and wealth and privilege that we can, tolerate these worthless parasites. But in civilizations where there aren't such huge surpluses of value for these kind of people to extract, their parasitic behavior would be much less tolerated and much more vigorously suppressed. And, that's precisely what we see at various times and at various places. These people have been suppressed. I mean, in medieval Europe, they had the Albigensian Crusade to suppress these kind of proto-hippies that, these Cathars who were, advocating sodomy and gender equality, at least, by the standards of the day, and pacifism and vegetarianism and all this other kind of stuff. That seems very progressive. It's hard to believe it could have originated in the Middle Ages, but what did they do? They declared a crusade and just eradicated them. And that's what would happen to these social justice types in any kind of sane society or any kind of society that couldn't afford to tolerate them. And most societies haven't been able to afford to tolerate them. We've been able to afford to tolerate them to a very high degree. And so we have, as a form of abundance signaling, as a form of conspicuous consumption. But it may already have gone too far. It has gone, farther than we can actually afford to tolerate. And we may have to start reining it in. But why are they so preoccupied with destroying Western civilization? That seems incredibly short-sighted, incredibly counterproductive, even for them. Well, one clue is provided in a video by a fellow named Yuri Bezmenov. Now, this was a KGB defector, and he recorded some interviews in the 80s and some talks in the 80s, and I'll link one of them below. And he's basically describing communist subversion. And, it hasn't escaped notice that these social justice people don't seem to have a positive vision for the future. Like, they don't have any internal measures or criteria within their ideology by which they could define success or victory. They don't have a positive, coherent vision for the utopian future that they supposedly desire. There's no way to declare that they've arrived. They just have this process of subdividing society into ever more fine-grained dichotomies of oppression versus victimization. And, continually splitting off more and more obscure kulak groups to punish and liquidate in like a witch hunt that never ends. So it seems totally pointless. What are these people getting at? Now, maybe they're just stupid short-term parasites. Maybe they're just, they're not the sharpest knives in the drawer, that's for sure. That much is obvious by now. So maybe they're just engaging in stupid, self-serving, short-term individual parasitism. And that's one possibility. And it could be fairly likely because, this kind of stuff is, it works. And as long as it works, there'll probably be individuals that will fill these evolutionary niches. And there are a lot of these evolutionary niches because we have a very affluent society with a lot of surpluses to expropriate by these kind of means. But another possibility is provided by these videos of Yuri Bezmenov, KGB defector, talking about communist subversion, and he even uses words like equality and social justice to describe the activities of the KGB because, according to him, only 15% of the KGB's budget and efforts and manpower were devoted to, like, espionage, spy stuff. And the rest of it was devoted to propaganda. 85% of their efforts and resources were devoted to propaganda and subversion, and this had several stages. The first would be demoralization. And this would be an attempt to confuse people and to demoralize people so that they can't come to correct conclusions or form sensible opinions. And he argued that, in the 80s this was already long complete. Like, several generations of Americans had already been demoralized in this way by infiltration and subversion, by, communist-backed ideologues. And, the next stage would be destabilization. So, all these little victim groups that they cultivate would destabilize society, and the conflicts and fractures that they had been stoking and fueling would destabilize society, and that would provide both the opportunity and also the pretext and the justification for authoritarian socialism to come in and save the day and restore order, and that process would be known as normalization. And he called these victim groups, these little pawns, these social justice warriors, useful idiots, because that was their role. That was their function. They were useful idiots, right up until the point of destabilization. And then they no longer became useful. Then in the process of normalization, they were to be liquidated. And they already had lists prepared of people to liquidate. Because, what these people have been promised, the utopia that they've been promised, is really not possible or worthwhile to deliver. So there's really there's no realistic victory condition for parasites, because they're worthless parasites. They're all cost and no benefit. And so you can't create a society of parasites or for parasites. Ultimately, after the destabilization phase, these useful idiots would no longer be useful, and they would just be the first against the wall. This glorious society, future society of equality and social justice, would never materialize, and we'd get authoritarian socialism instead, which would be something, completely different. And, you don't see much of the social justice stuff in the former Eastern Bloc, that's for sure. They kind of wiped these people out already in their countries that they took over, that they succeeded in taking over before. They had a sexual revolution in the 1920s in the Soviet Union, but they had to clamp down on that pretty fast because of its tremendous destructive effects. And we've let ours go on a lot longer and destroy a lot more. And we haven't clamped down on it yet. But, so this raises the question. The KGB supposedly no longer exists. So they might have started these balls rolling. They might have set this stuff in motion. But what's going on now? Has this useful idiocy just taken on a life of its own? Has it become a self-propagating kind of individual parasitism? Has it, like metastasized into a self-propagating cancer? Or has it been co-opted by other groups and other organs? Or, have the same backers who were behind communism, and are the same backers still behind the social justice nonsense in the West today? Maybe it all comes from a common source. Maybe that common source, has never gone anywhere. I don't know. More questions than answers here. But there are some interesting aspects to this, and watching the video is an enlightening and thought-provoking introduction to the issue, because it's certainly very hard to explain this social justice nonsense, at least in some ways, unless you consider the possibility that there's something behind it, something more than just, short-term, short-sighted, individual, opportunistic parasitism, which that can explain a lot of it, but we know it didn't start out as that, and, if you look at some of the people backing it today, that probably doesn't account for all of it today. because it does enjoy a lot of elite support from elite individuals and elite institutions and organizations and, non-governmental. It is a whole industry in its own right. There is a diversity industry and a social justice industry, but it gets even more support than that. And so there's something behind it, and it's worth considering, what that may be and what their aims and ambitions may be.